ready? Okay, y'all can switch if you haven't already. Okay, let's go through them. So, number one, which of the following conditions that must be satisfied by a successful price? Which of the following conditions must be satisfied by a successful price discrimination scheme? So the seller must have market power. Okay. The seller must be able to identify different customer groups with different demand elasticities. Right? Makes sense. You gotta just, if you're going to do price discrimination between two groups, you have to actually be able to figure out who they are, right? The seller must be able to prevent arbitrage between the two groups. So what does that mean?
So like different prices to the same, like you can sell the same product at different prices to different people who can compare those prices or sell amongst themselves.
Right. So like you can't have a military discount and then allow the military people to buy their tickets cheap and then sell them to someone else, right? To non-military, and because then they could make a profit, right? That would be an arbitrage profit, right? Okay. Same thing with a senior citizen discount, right? That's pretty classic price discrimination, right? Pretty easy to tell. I don't think, Jacob, did they ever ask you if you want a senior citizen discount?
Not yet, but great beer days.
All right. Okay, the strategy underlying price discrimination is, gosh. C, okay, to increase total revenue by charging higher prices to those with less elastic demand for the product and lower prices to those with more elastic demand. That makes sense, right? So what kind of examples do you have for someone with, like for two groups with less and more elastic demand for something? I'm looking at the TV now, or the online TV people. This is me waving at you. Can't tell. Anybody think of an example?
Maybe like some people who work out a lot more, if they have a favorite brand, they're willing to pay goes up a little bit more. But someone who's not as committed isn't gonna, they're just looking to switch to another brand.
So how would one company handle that? Would you have the non-committal protein powder? Like, would you have one that's one branded for like lazy people and one branded for?
You just offer like a premium product for those who are willing to pay it.
I see. Okay. You just call one of them like super muscle fuel, and you call the other one like generic protein powder. Okay, makes sense. All right, that was B. Which one was that? Yeah, 2. Numbers and letters. Okay, number 3. You pay $60 at a mall video game store for a computer game that you have been dying to play. 3 months later, while at the same mall video game store, you see the same game for $20. What is this an example of? D. Right. Indirect price discrimination. How does that work?
Because they don't necessarily do their discounting the game for. They can't identify the group.
So they can't identify the group, so that's what makes it indirect, right? So why is it price discrimination? I mean, just prices for the same thing. What's the big deal? There you go. Good, yeah. So it's like TVs, right? Way back in the day, TVs weighed like 700 pounds and they were like this big, right? And then they came out with fancier TVs that cost like $3 million, right? And then the crappy old TVs were cheap, right? And then eventually they come out with even fancier TVs and the previously fancy ones get cheaper, right? It's the same kind of thing. Get all the rich people to buy them when they're brand new, and then everybody else can buy them at a cheaper price later, and you can still make money, right? Makes sense. All right, number 4, which is not an example of bundling. Okay, so we've got an extra value meal at Wendy's. Is that bundling? What do you think? What do you bundle?
You do multiple items, like get a drink and like a side, and all together.
Okay, so this is at Wendy's, right? So Wendy's, so you're gonna get like a burger and fries and a drink. And if you bought the fries and the drink individually and the burger individually, right? They would all cost, like, well, these two, the fries and the drink would cost more, right? Or at least that's the idea. The idea is that you pay full price for the burger and then you pay like $1.50 for, allegedly $2 or $3 worth of stuff, right? Okay, that makes sense. So that is an example of bundling, so it's not the correct answer for number 4. A buy one, get one half off sale at Foot Locker. Okay, obviously, right? You're bundling 2 things. Obviously, you pay full price for one and then you get the other one half off, right? Microsoft Office. What's that?
Word, PowerPoint,
Okay. Yeah. So you buy a whole bunch of things together and they just give you one low price, right? And in their case, it's actually more like different bundles, right? They have like the Essentials bundle, which is just 3 programs, and then they have the one with all the programs I don't know how to use, right? Like Access and all that stuff. What?
The executive suite.
Yeah, the executive, yeah, there you go. Which doesn't make any sense. I mean, what executive is actually using Access, right? The executive is going to pay somebody else to use Access. Silly names. Okay, large tub of popcorn at the movie store. Movie theater. Movie store. Movie theater. It's been a long day, folks. So, yeah, so that's not an example of bundling, right? But in and of itself, right? Right, so it's more like popcorn doesn't cost anything anyway, so you might as well buy the big one, right? And, well, to an extent, you could say, maybe it's bundling with popcorn in the movie or something. Yeah, large tub of popcorn, point is you just get the big bucket, you get refills, right? So you pay a ton of money up front, and the idea is you're not going to get up watching the Avengers movie or whatever, right? So they're going to you pay $10 for 1 bucket of popcorn.
Yeah.
Say what? Yeah, the 800% markup, and the idea that you won't bring your own popcorn. That's the hardest one to bring in on your own, right? Because it has to be hot, buttery, good. But Snickers or whatever, I'm not paying $8 for the Snickers. That's nuts. Okay, so number 5. Did anybody figure out what they think the answer should be for this one? I'll give you a hint. It does not appear on the page.
I would say A.
It's A.
What was it?
It's A. I think the thing is, the key word in here is that the company cannot distinguish between users. So B is impossible, right? You can't just sell to them. And you can't sell to both home and commercial users at 2 prices, right? Because you can't distinguish between them. So A must be like,
Sell able to a certain commercial at $3.99.
sell it at, like some other price, right? I don't know what it is. It's not those 2, but it's also not none of the above. It's the same. And part of that I know because I got the answer to that. So the higher cost for a refundable airline ticket for business travelers can be explained by which one?
I put indirect, but I'm conflicted.
Yeah, the
Okay.
I think it's indirect because it could be anyone buying the ticket, even if you're not like a business person. I could buy a business class ticket.
but you're changing the price for business people. You're setting apart your pricing based on how you're separating your target market.
Okay, so this one, I think the terms make it a little complex. So it doesn't say business class tickets, right? So it's not like, right, we're just talking about Southwest, right? There's just one plane, all the seats are the same, right? We'll let you get the old lady who puts a book on the seat next to her. Hate that. Not good. Rude. Very rude. Yeah, so when you buy a ticket, does the airline know if you're a business traveler or not? I mean, they can ask you, right? They can ask, are you traveling for business or pleasure? But you could just lie, right? Or just not answer it, maybe, right? They do ask, I think, Delta. For sure Delta asks. I lived in Georgia for 2 years. I know what Delta asks, but I don't remember. So can they discriminate between, or can they tell the difference between people traveling for fun and people traveling for business? Nope.
My question sucks.
So it's got to be indirect, right?
Yeah, I was.
That question sucks.
Okay, well, all I'm going to say is I didn't write. But so the point is, right, that it has to be indirect, but it is price discrimination, right? Because what you do is you just charge a ton of money for those refundable tickets, right? And only people who are going to use that refund a lot will buy the refundable ticket, right? Everybody feel good about that? No?
See, I thought the refundable ticket thing was to prevent arbitrage, because it's harder to resell if you could just sell it and resell it, you know what I mean?
Yeah, but I kind of doubt these days you could arbitrage a ticket anyway.
That's probably true, yeah.
It's got your name on it.
Oh, yeah, I didn't
If
think
your
about
ID doesn't match the name on the ticket, then you're not getting on the plane. You're not even getting in the airport hardly. Yeah, well, yeah, and in 1999, you were like, what, 5? You know.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you didn't fly in 1999, don't tell me that. Or if you did, you don't remember it. Neither did I. Well, I did. I flew in 1999. I flew on Vanguard Airlines back when there were more than like 4 airlines in the U.S. Little airline, Kansas City to Denver. Right. I was in middle school in 1999. Okay. I guess I'll take all of those. Okay. So today, we're going to have fun, because all we're going to do is talk about games all day. How does that sound? Don't worry about the other word in there, theory, because that makes it sound like it's not going to be fun. So, how many of you have had some kind of game theory type thing before? Jason, I know you have. Okay. Couple more, 3 in here. Okay. Somebody explain what it is. What is game theory?
I know it's like you have to do like, it's been a while, but yeah, it has to do something with like finding possible outcomes, like maybe way off, but just finding like what outcomes are gonna happen, best chance, almost like a probability kind of thing. It's tied into it a little bit.
Okay, yeah, you can get that far in game theory, sure.
You're using incentives to determine people's most likely actions against.
Okay, yeah, so it's kind of trying to understand incentives and how they play out between 2 different groups or maybe multiple groups, but we're going to stick with 2. Keep it simple. And so the first one that your book goes through, I'm going to kind of thumb through your book tonight, because that's kind of what I read through, and then I don't remember game theory. It was on very well. It was on my PhD exam back in 2011, 12. And my whole exam, my whole micro qualifier was game theory. So I should remember more, but I remember the basics, but I don't remember all the advanced stuff, and I don't remember a lot of different games because I haven't been teaching much. So I'm going to stick with what they have in here, which I think is perfectly good set of problems in here. So this is a game tree, okay, that we use to understand sequential games. Okay, so a sequential game is one in which one party makes a choice between 2 alternatives, 2 or more alternatives, right? In this case, 2. And then another party based on that choice from the first party, has a set of choices, right? In this case, 2 choices. So we've got, you know, maybe player 1 here, and then this is player 2, right? I'm just kind of giving you the setup here. And so player 1, you know, they can make choice 1 or, well, let's do this. Let's do choice A or choice B, right? And then player 2 might have choice A, choice B, choice A, choice B, right? And then down here at the bottom, we show the payoffs that each player receives in the event that a set of choices is made, right? So if player 1 chooses A and player 2 chooses A, then usually the way we write it is like this. Let's see, this X, Y, Y, Z, X, Z, Y, something like that. This is just how we write it, okay? And so maybe we would put like a formula in here, or we would put a number, just put a number like maybe a dollar amount, right, for payoff. And then what we can do is we can kind of figure out what's going to happen, right, based on what we know about these numbers, right? Starting with the second move. Okay? So this is called backwards induction. But the book, I don't think the book actually says backwards induction. It just kind of says that what you do is you look forward and then solve it backwards or something. Yeah, there we go. Look forward, reason back. But in the math world or whatever, yeah, that's what I call it, backwards induction. So what you would do is you would look at player 2's choices, right? And so player 2's payoffs would be this second one here, right? The second one in each pair. Does that make sense? Can y'all see this okay online? Yeah, good. And so we would look at player 2's options and we would say, well, you know, okay, if we're over here and player 1 chooses A, which one is player 2 going to choose, right, based on these payoffs? And of course, we're kind of assuming that, you know, of course, player 2 doesn't really care much about player 1, right? Player 2 is just worried about player 2's payoffs, right? And then once we get that figured out, like let's say if player 1 chooses A, player 2 is going to choose B, and if player 1 chooses B, player 2 is going to choose A. Let's just say. Well, so then we can go back here to player 1's choice, right? And so we've narrowed it down, right? Now we know we just have to look at these 2 options here, right? These 2 sets of payoffs, right? Because these are the only ones that are relevant, right? Player 2 has done us a favor and narrowed it down, right? So player 1 is going to look at these 2, right? This one and this one, and they're going to decide their choice based on whether this track makes more sense or is better for them, right? Or whether this track is better for them. So if we say X is greater than Y, right? In other words, if this payoff right here is bigger than this one, then player 1's going to choose B, and player 2 is going to choose A. Make sense? Questions about this? Anybody? Game theory, sir, how are you feeling? Just look okay?
That's gonna be way harder. I don't know, that's cool, yeah, I get it so far.
Like I said, what better than I thought I did. Okay. So, but you kind of get the basic formula, right? We've got players, we've got choices written on the legs here, and we've got payouts written down here at the bottom with first player on the left and the second player on the right. Easy enough to remember all that, right? So, how can we apply this to, issues in this class? So I think the book does a great job explaining one possible set of choices. So let's say we want to talk about kind of barriers to entry kind of stuff, right? So do you remember that? I think we talked about barriers to entry when I was here. Right, it's like stuff that, like sort of characteristics of an industry, maybe things that a monopolist might do, right, to keep other people from coming into the industry, right? It can also be barriers to exit, right? You make them afraid to come in because if they need to get out, then they're going to lose a ton of money, right? Like, that's kind of what you want. So, we can use this game theory stuff to kind of try to understand, these sort of strategic type of decisions. And so, in this case, we're going to talk about this potential entrant here, and this is the incumbent firm. In other words, it's the firm that's already in the industry. Okay, that's what we mean by incumbent. And so the entrant can either decide to enter the industry, right, be in the industry, or they can choose to stay out of it, right? And the incumbent can either be nice, here, I'll just put it happy face, or they can be mean. Right, so they could be sort of accommodative, right? You could write it if you want to be serious. Accommodate or fight, right? Makes sense. And so, what are ways they could fight? How would you put up a fight if you were an incumbent with an entrant coming into the industry?
Trying to pass more regulations, like licensing and stuff.
Okay, so, sorry, what? Okay, so that one is a little bit of a dynamic suggestion there, right? Because you wouldn't want to just lower prices, because then you would just lose money from the get-go, right? And then they would just walk away and you just lost money for nothing. Right? So, I guess lowering prices is sort of the fighting thing, but getting regulations passed might not cost you as much, right? But you're right, and I've you hear this all the time about like Walmart or something like that, right? And I haven't read his biography, his autobiography, but the guy who's either the founder of Walmart or one of the early CEOs said that he actually did that on purpose. Would go in, lower prices, knock out all the competition, and raise prices back up. Wow. I never thought that was actually possible. Who knows? So, up here, if the entrant stays out, what do you think their payoff's going to be? Yeah, so like we just kind of assume, they're not going to lose anything, but they're not going to gain anything either, right? So they might get a big goose egg right there, right? What about the incumbent? Okay, well, but it's probably pretty good what they have right now, right? Because they're a monopolist, we presume, right? Or, part of a small number of firms in the industry. So maybe we're going to give them a big old 10. How about that? All right. So if the entrant just chooses to stay out, right? all on their own, then they're not going to get anything, and the incumbent is going to get 10. So if the entrant goes ahead and goes into and tries to enter the industry, and the incumbent accommodates them, do you think the incumbent is still going to get 10? Right, that was the whole problem in the first place, right? They don't want somebody else in the industry, right? So maybe they're still going to get some positive payoff, but not as much as they had before, right? But what about the entrant? Another in the industry. Sorry? Yeah, they'll make something too, right? Maybe they'll make the same amount as the former monopolist, right? Now there's two firms, right? So to an extent, maybe they'll split profits, costs will go up for both companies, or prices will come down, or both, right? Okay. What about this one? If the incumbent chooses not to be accommodated, they choose to fight the new entrant.
Would they lose less? Maybe like they have 7, they have like 3. Like because it'd be harder for the entrant to be as productive as it could be.
Okay. So let's think about kind of what the incumbent has to do to fight. Right, so, and we said there were 2 ways they could fight, right? We said lower prices, okay? Or we said we could try to get some law passed to make it so that only the incumbent has a license, and then this one has to go find a license, or pay for a license, right? But, what do you have to do to get a law passed for the incumbent?
Spend a lot of resources.
Yeah, but we're doing what?
Lobbying.
Yes. What do we know about lobbying? Have to hire lawyers. What do we know about lawyers? They have very expensive shoes. Okay? So because they have very expensive shoes, they have high salaries. They have high salaries, it's expensive to pay, right? So if you're the incumbent and you fight, you might have to pay some money up front. You might lose money for a while, right? Just keep them out. So, kind of got to think about time frame a little bit, right? But at least for a while, they might lose some money, right? The incumbent. Right? Or if they had to lower their prices, they would probably have to lower their prices farther than they would if they had just let the other firm in, right? Because they're going to have to deter the other firm from coming in, right? So they got to really crush those prices down, right? To the extent that they might actually tolerate losses for a short period of time, right? So that's what this -5 would represent, right? So now you're the new entrant, and you're fighting an established company. What's your income statement look like?
Probably not good.
Right? Not good. So maybe you're going to get one of these too. Right? You see the reasoning on how I put these payoffs in here? Does that make sense? Okay. So what's the solution? How do we figure out the solution? Don't tell me what the solution is. How do we figure it out?
Try to figure out what would be the best interest of.
Right, so we use backward deduction, so we start at the bottom and go back up, right? And this thing could get complicated, right? If we had more players, you have maybe like 3 or 4 levels to this thing, right? You get really wide, right? That makes sense? So you had like player 1, player 2, and then player 3 would be down here.
Yeah, that sounds awful.
Right, and be like, right? And we have to like write this way on the board or something. I don't know. It's a long. I don't know. So I'm the incumbent, If the entrant chooses in, what am I gonna do?
Accommodate.
In this case, I'm gonna accommodate, right? Okay. So that means we're not doing this one. Right? That's the notation your book uses. Double line. Okay. So we're going here as the incumbent. So that means the entrant is going to get either 5. Sorry, I didn't want to do wrong. Let's use colors. Right? So that means the entrant, well, they're looking at this number and they're looking at this number. So are they going to be in or out? They're going to go in, right? So in this case, right, in other words, given these payoffs, right, and these options, in other words, given the stuff that we've assumed, right, what's going to happen in this case is that the entrant is going to say, yeah, I'll do it. And the incumbent's going to look at how shiny his lawyer's shoes are, and he's going to be like, let him in. Right? I don't want to pay the lawyer. That make sense? Look at me directly in my eyes if it doesn't make any sense at all. Okay. Looking directly into the camera, because then I can't see you if I look in the camera. Everybody okay? Good. Yes, no? Sort of? Questions? It's just not fun, or, you know. What question do you have, Karen?
So who actually is making the final decision, or does it depend on which move they want to make?
So the issue that makes here is called a sequential move game, right? So it assumes that one person makes a decision and then the other person makes a decision, right?
Mm-hmm.
Here in a second, we'll talk about simultaneous move games that are that make a little bit more sense given how like stuff really works, right? Because you would assume that they're just going to make choices whenever they make them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like for instance, it's probably going to be probabilities, right? The entrant is going to try to figure out what the odds are that the other company would fight them, right?
Okay.
And the incumbent, you know, they're probably dealing with possible entrants all the time, right? So we're kind of, in a way, we're simplifying everything down, right? Very simply, like in terms of these payoffs, number one, right? Like those are all simplified. And number two, we're simplifying sort of in terms of the time frames, right? We're just saying there's 2 periods of time. One, when incumbent makes a decision, and 2, when they make a decision. So it's just simplified, right? So, okay. So that's one way to kind of use this tool, and maybe this will help explain another way to use this. So let's say now that things are a little different. And now we have something called commitment, right? Now we have a situation where the incumbent says, I'm taking on everybody, right? Anybody tries to enter my industry, I'm calling my lawyer, right? How fancy shoes are. So in that case, we just completely wipe this out as possible. Does that make sense? Now it's real simple, right? I'm the entrant. 0's looking awful good now, right? Does that make sense? Now, if the entrant knows the incumbent's going to, I'm going to mute you, Karen, because I'm hearing myself growl into the microphone. Or I don't know if I can. Can I?
I did mute myself.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, I'll just assume so. Sorry about that. So in this case, right, we kind of looked at things a little bit differently now. So we're assuming that now we know, now the entrant knows what the incumbent's going to do, right? They know they're going to fight, so they're just going to stay away from it, right? So when we talk about bargaining and stuff in the next chapter, this is how we'll kind of talk about. My goodness, I hate summer. The worst time. It's we'll talk about this commitment thing a little bit more. But now we want to move on to these sequential move games and talk a little bit about that funny phrase that Jacob brought up a minute ago called Nash equilibrium. So in this case, we're going to just introduce this other type of game framing. Okay? So in this case, well, before it was a sequential move, right? One person made a decision, and then the other party made a decision, right? We sort of figured out what was going to happen by looking at it backwards. But in this case, we're going to kind of assume that everybody's making the same decision at the same time. Okay? Tell me. I know we got that corn, but does it have to pollinate all summer? All right, so all right. So the way this works is we kind of set up a nice little matrix here. So we've got one player that has options this way, and the other player has options this other direction. And so we're still going to be using the kind of the two payoff setup, but we're going to kind of go into the world of goofy game theory. So game theory has a lot of these little examples of different setups and different payoffs. Okay, and one of them, excuse me, one of them is called the prisoner's dilemma. Okay, and so the way this one works. So the way this works is we look at these two people, Jesse and Frank, and they were sort of, hanging out together as two young gents often do, robbing a bank. And when they leave, they run off in different directions, but they both get picked up by your friend and mine, the great employees of the district attorney of the state of Kansas, right? Cops. So what happens is the cops get them in two different rooms because you wouldn't put them in the same room, right? Put them in separate rooms and you see if they got the same story or whatever, right? Or at least that's one way to think about it. And Jesse and Frank both have two options, right? They can either confess to the crime or they can stay quiet. Not say anything about allegedly robbing a bank. Right? That makes sense? So what we're going to try to do is figure out if there's one stable solution in here. In other words, one square or rectangle, whatever, right? Where both people are happy and they don't want to move, right? So in other words, we kind of need some way to solve this and see what kind of solution we can get. Is that too small for y'all in mind? No? Okay. I'll make it bigger next time. Sorry about that. So what we do, so last time what we did was we picked one person, right, specifically the bottom player, right, second player. We looked at their payoffs, and we sort of narrowed it down for the first person, for the first player, right? Well, in this case, it doesn't really matter who we pick, right? We're just going to start with one. So let's start with Jesse and figure out that if Frank confesses, which of these two does Jesse want to do? So I conveniently put the payoffs here in green for Jesse and orange for Frank. So if Frank confesses, Jesse wants to confess, right? Because maybe he's going to do less time, like maybe he's going to get 5 years instead of 10, right? Does that make sense? So if we know Frank's going to confess, then Jesse's going to do confess, right? Over here, if Frank stays quiet, he's smart. Then if Jesse confesses, like, because here's the thing, the DA is going to say, look, your buddy Frank over here, we saw him, he was with you. So if you confess, we'll give you a light sentence and we'll throw the book at him. He's singing like a bird. He's pinning you to the wall. You better confess before he does. Right? You've seen the show movies, right? This is not foreign to anyone. Maybe you actually been in this scenario. Right? So if Jesse says, okay, well if Frank stays quiet, what do I want to do? Well, if all he's out for is himself, right? Then he might choose this one, right? He would choose this one because he's going to get less time, right? They don't have enough evidence to get us on a big charge. We're just going to get probation, right? So I'm underlying the payoffs for Jesse that make the most sense when Frank does one or the other, right? So I circled this one. If Frank stays quiet, Jesse wants to stay quiet. If Frank confesses, Jesse wants to confess. Okay, now let's do it the other way. Let's look at Frank's decision between these two if Jesse confesses. So if Frank knows Jesse's going to confess, then we look at the top half here, right? Is Frank going to want to confess or stay quiet? He wants to confess, right? Because he's going to get -5 rather than -10. Right? Remember, we're only looking at the top half. Boom. Okay. Now, here's the thing. We're already pretty sure we have two solutions, right? But this one is the one that the DA wants them both to do, right? DA wants to get both of them, right? Because then she gets elected to mayor the next year or something, right? Tough on crime. Well, Frank's choice between quiet and confess. If Jesse is quiet, pretty clear, right? -2 instead of -3, right? You'd rather have -2, right? Rather do a little probation than, spend 6 months in jail, right? So there's no Nash equilibrium here, okay? There's no stable solution where if no matter what Frank does, Jesse doesn't have a stable choice, right? Jesse's decision is dependent on Frank's decision, right? If Frank does this, Jesse picks one. If Frank does the other, Jesse picks the other. Does that make sense? So it's unstable, right? It's hard to predict what's going to happen, right? So if we think about this from the DA standpoint, we don't like this, right? This sucks. So for the DA, what can we change about this scenario to try to affect the outcome? What can we do?
Negotiate with the person who confess. We'll try to turn one against the other.
Okay. Have you ever heard, okay, who's ever watched a cop show? Anybody? Online? Yeah, so a few of you. Okay. Lewis, you've never seen cop show? Ah, okay, jeez. All right. So maybe here, these twos here, everybody stays quiet, or maybe these fives, right? These fives compared to tens. It's like, well, hey, look, you both just confessed, right? Then, or sorry, if Jesse confesses, then and Frank doesn't, then boom, we're gonna throw the book at Frank. But Jesse's still gonna get 3 years, right? And as we see, right, the DA is realizing that this is putting her in a bad spot, right? So here's the thing. If the DA does this one little trick, okay, called immunity, right, then we can shift the solution. Let's get rid of these little underlines here, and let's give everybody some immunity. Yay! They're not on board with my joy over here. Oh. That's good. Right? So now, we're the DA. What have we told them? We said, hey, look, you confess, and your buddy doesn't, we'll just let you go home. Right? Just go home. Enjoy your money. Or maybe they were crap, I don't know. Or maybe they were failed bank loans. So this is for attempted bank loan. I don't know. Okay. Any pressure on you, right? Okay, so let's go back to this again. See if we've got what we want as the DA, right? Well, if Frank picks confess, what does Jesse want to do? Okay. If Frank picks quiet, what does Jesse want to do? Oh, that's different than it was, right? Remember, there was a -3 here last time, right? In other words, confess, we're still gonna, still gonna throw you in the slammer. But it's gonna be a whole lot better than if you didn't. Right? Now we've said, sorry, the assumption would be that if you don't confess, then your buddy will, and we'll put you in jail for a long time. Right? But here, the point is, hey, if I just confess, I get to walk, right? So I don't want to be quiet now, right? Even though being quiet doesn't hurt me too much, right? I'm Jesse, I want to confess now, right? What does Frank want to do if Jesse confesses? So now we're choosing between these two. Jesse confesses. Yeah, I like that one, right? -5 versus -10. Sounds pretty good, right? And what's our choice if Jesse stays quiet? Right? So the stable equilibrium here, the Nash equilibrium, is confess, confess. Right? Because Frank is always confessing and Jesse is always confessing.
Does the first and second examples, they're the same where like one person is basing their decision on what the other person does, correct? Both examples were like that?
Right, but the difference between this and the previous, are you talking about juxtaposing against the previous?
Yeah.
Yes, with the previous one, the assumption was that the way we figure out what happens is we do it sequentially, right? We let one person choose first and then the other, right? And notice in the other one, we kind of had things set up where like they sort of had different decisions with different payouts, right? Whereas here, everybody pretty much has symmetrical payouts. Now that doesn't mean you can't do this one with different payouts for different people. But that sequential one is really nice when there's different people with different types of decisions.
So this one's just like a hypothetical, like what would you want to choose if this were the case, rather than like predicting like what we should do, or if it's the same, like this is what we would do.
Yeah, so the thing with this one is it's trying to figure out if there's a stable set of choices.
Okay.
Right? We're trying to figure out if the payoffs can be set up such that we always get people making the choices we want them to make. Right? Or I mean, that's a silly way to put it.
But that makes sense, though. That makes more sense.
Like they're making the decisions that we can predict what they're going to do. Right?
So we're looking at this more from like the DA standpoint of like how we can. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah, the whole point is to sort of have like the God's eye view, right? Like we're looking down on like the chessboard, right?
I was looking at it through like Frank and Jesse's eye, and I was like, okay, like. I don't know, but
Well,
that makes more
okay,
sense
so
now.
here's the thing, right? From their point of view, right, if they understand this, if they understand this is the way the game is set up for payoffs, then, if they could coordinate, then they would both choose quiet, right? Yeah. So here's the difference, right? When we talk about these simultaneous games like this, right, we can talk about them happening, at the same time, and just like a one-shot deal, right? Like it happens one time and boom, that's it, right? Well, if that's the case, you're probably going to get this, right? But if we let them talk to each other and they coordinate, right, then we can get in this situation. Or, and we've shown this in the lab for economics, right? If you let people play these types of games over and over and over, right? Like a game where, if you give more money away, you get more money back or something like that, right? If you play it over and over and over, you eventually figure out which one you really are better off doing. Does that make sense? So the illustration is that, even in this simple framework, we can manipulate, if we can manipulate the payoffs, right, we can get to a stable solution in the game. And this is from a one-shot perspective, right? This is no coordination and no repetition. Yeah.
So the Nash equilibrium is in -5, -5. Is that like the best solution?
This is the one that's stable, right? Because again, and the way we explain this is, no matter what Frank does, Jesse always picks confess, given these payoffs, right? No matter what Jesse does, Frank always picks confess, boom, boom, right? And Jesse, boom, boom. So that's why it's stable, right? That's why it's a Nash equilibrium. Time is it? 7:04. What's the normal time? 7:15?
Right?
Yeah.
Oh,
7:15, 7:30, right? And then,
Yeah. Varies.
Alright, stop it there.
Okay. Well, let's do a little more. Let's do some business application here. Okay. I'm going to redraw this so it's clear. Okay, so again, that example was when we're talking about something being sort of a one-shot deal, and there's no coordination. And so, okay, I mean, that's good enough for, you know, if this was a criminal justice class, right? But how does it play into, you know, this is a business econ course, right? How does it play into that? So here, we're going to do the same kind of setup to a degree, but we're going to try to talk about it in business terms. Okay. So that's a little bigger and easier to see, I'm sure. Okay, so in this case, we're looking at a pricing dilemma between two kind of department store, you know, clothing store kind of thing. Okay, and so the idea here is that either of them can choose to price low, right? Have low prices for their stuff, or have high prices for their stuff, right? And you know, it's like I don't know, like malls or you know, J.C. Penney stores or something like that, right? They kind of have a lot of the same stuff, right? So the thing we want to figure out here is what are the incentives, or what's going to happen in this simultaneous new game, and what happens if we let them coordinate with each other? Okay. So let's say that Gibbons, one of the stores, picks low price. So we're Cooper. Do we want to pick low or high? High, right? You got positive payouts now. Makes a little more sense, right? Whoops. We want low, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, low. I shouldn't have put the low above. That's weird, right? It's like when you like write a 5, or no. It's like when you write the word pink with a blue marker or something. You ever seen those? So if Gibbons chooses low, Cooper wants to choose low. If Gibbons chooses high, what's Cooper want? Low. Okay. Right? Because Cooper's looking between 400 and 300. Okay, now let's set Cooper at low and figure out what Gibbons wants. They want low prices, right? Not the one. Okay, so let's fix Cooper at high and figure out what Gibbons wants. Looks a lot like the solution we just had, right? Because in a global sense, right, if they both pick high prices, you know, that's not bad. Hey, that's not 400, but it's 300, and that's sure better than 100, right? And if I could have made sure that Gibbons was also going to choose high prices, right? Then I could have got 300 instead of 100. Right now, if I'm Gibbons, and I could have made sure Cooper was going to pick this one, right? I mean, 360 is not bad, right? It's not as good as 480, but, you know, I would have preferred that to a big fat goose egg, right? Make sense? So we get stuck over here, right? These department stores. We get stuck over here in low price world. So, okay, we're not, you know, potential criminals, but active criminals, right? Sitting in two different interview rooms, right? We can talk to each other, right? Manager from Cooper just calls up the manager from Gibbons and say, hey, how much are you guys charging for the Gucci coats or whatever? Gucci make coats? I wouldn't know. I have a daughter, I'm sure I'll find out. Can't they just call each other up and say, hey, let's make this thing work. Let's do some high prices. What do you think? Could do that, right? Why not?
The company Cooper calls Gibbons and chooses to do the higher price, but then they decide to do and then Gibbons decides to not do the low price, then they'll kind of.
So this could sort of be unstable even if we could get them to work together, right? Because, you know, if I'm Cooper, I can call you up at Gibbons and say, hey, let's be high prices. And then Gibbons chooses high prices, right? And then I go and undercut them and make all the money. Boom! Tuesday for Gibbons. Right? So it's sort of unstable, just potentially unstable, at least inherently, right? But the other thing is, our friends at the Federal Trade Commission will not like this very much. They don't like this one. Okay? That's Flutie Brain Nuts. They don't like this one. Okay? So, taking a big risk, calling up your competitor and saying, hey, be friends, right? Another way to kind of get at this would be to just agree to stay out of each other's markets, right? Like, let's say now they're traveling vacuum salesmen, right? Cooper and Gibbons, right? It's like, hey, look, you take the east side of town, I'll take the west side of town, right? It's thought away, you know, we don't want to split it north and south. Right? What do you think about that? We got two competitors splitting up their regions. We like that? Because see, now they can both do the same thing, right? They can both price high, right? Because they've got different customers. Right? And Cooper is promising not to try to sell to Gibbons customers. But of course, just like before, Gibbons is not really as bright as we think he is. We need to go sell to some of his people, right? Or Cooper. Right? So there's still an incentive to cheat on the deal, right? Another thing you can do that I don't know is legal or not, so I guess can do, careful with that, is have you ever had one of those price guarantee things? Right? It's like you get the ad, right? It's got all this stuff. Because I mean, that's one thing they could do, right? Is Cooper could send ads to the west side of town and Gibbons could send ads to the east side of town, right? Split their markets that way, right? We'll talk a little more about advertising in a bit. But you've seen the price match thing, right? You've seen that. Why would you do that? Why would you be a price match? Why would you give a price match guarantee?
Just to guarantee that you're getting a sale. If someone finds a better price, you don't lose that sale, then you still at least will get you'll get their business.
Okay, that's reasonable.
Great people you're still not doing it otherwise.
Sure.
Mutually assured destruction.
Okay, that's one way to put it, right? So mutually assured destruction, so saying that, well, if you're gonna lower your prices, I'm gonna lower my prices, right? But here's the funny thing, they actually work the exact opposite way, right? If I put out a price match guarantee, and you put out a price match guarantee, then really what we can both do is try this with our prices, right? But we have to agree, right? We still have to have some communication, right? Got to play a little telephone. But you can do that, right? I mean, in theory, that's what it would allow you to do, right? Is you just automatically take the whole price competition thing out of the store, right? Now we're just and we kind of baked in a way to get around the whole disincentive problem, right? Because what are you going to do? Really promise a price match? Look, seriously, what are you going to do? I mean, you can lower your prices, but they're just going to lower theirs too. So it's not going to get you anything. So that's actually a really good way to cut out the price competition. And with that, potential advice to be a criminal, I will let you go find a beverage or whatever. You know if he stops these recordings? Does he get two recordings?
Or just one.
Okay. We got at least pause it. Okay, so. Okay, guys, we're gonna go back to another example of the sort of prisoner's dilemma kind of setup, but try to apply it a little bit to a more real world kind of business example. And so, two grocery stores in my hometown, Chanute, Kansas, just south of here about an hour or so. If you've ever been there, maybe some of you have. Back in the day when I first moved there was a Walmart on the north and south end of town, but it was a normal Walmart. It was a Walmart without a grocery store. No. This was before all that. This was like before Super Walmarts were a thing. So this was a long time ago. Yeah, mid-90s. Yeah, it was a long time ago. And so there were two grocery stores in town. There was one on the south end of town called IGA. There's still a thing, I think, in some places. And then there's DW Foods on the north end of town. And so, it kind of makes sense for things like this, for things like grocery stores to sort of exist and, geographically separately from each other, right? Because the whole idea is that, everybody on the south end of town goes to IGA and everybody on the north end of town goes to GW, right? And, they mainly have the same kind of stuff. Maybe one of them has a nicer butcher or something or whatever, but, most of that stuff's not going to make your decisions, right? And so, maybe you can get, these two companies have a decision about how to advertise, right? And so, like you get the little circular thing every week, like, here's our deal for Thursday through Sunday, right, or whatever. And so, it makes sense for these two to, send out those circulars, right, just to make sure that they're going to get, people into their store. Now, of course, they have, even that advertising is a little bit of its own strategy, right? So, like, they might have a handful of things on sale, right, or maybe, I don't know, how many things are in the thing on sale, 100 different items on there? Right, but they probably have, 900 different items in the store, maybe more than that, right? So the idea is they give you a sale on a few things, that they know you want for the summer, right? Like hot dogs and whatever, right? But then they know you're going to come in for other stuff too, right? So they might make a little bit less on their hot dogs, but they know you're going to get, I don't know, foam coolers for $25 or something like that, right? So the question is whether these two stores want to send their circulars kind of out to the edges of their respective north-south locations, right? And when they do that, those people on, kind of the fringes of their territory, so to speak, not official territory, but, they kind of get some of that benefit of price discrimination, right? Like people in G&W's territory, right, or on the north end of town, might get some of IGA's circulars, right? So they might drive a little farther, because it's like 10,000 people, it's not that big, right? They might drive all the way to the north end of town if they know they're going to get a lower price, right? Or, they could just kind of stick in their own, sending out their own circulars, and just kind of, let the price be what it's going to be. So we kind of want to figure out the solution to this game. Again, it looks like I set it up wrong already. Because this belongs here. So, if G&W chooses to price discriminate, right? In other words, send out more circulars, right? What does IGA want to do? They're going to price discriminate. What are we going to do? We're IGA. We're going to price discriminate, right? If G&W decides to have uniform pricing, right, not send out circulars, what do we want to do? So here, right, they're not sending out their circulars, right? They're doing uniform pricing. They're not going to send out their circulars, so their prices are going to be higher than ours, right? And so everybody's going to drive the extra 2.5 miles across town and come to our store, right? So what about G&W's decision if IGA decides they're going to price discriminate? Are we going to go here or here? So if IGA price discriminates, G&W then price discriminate. How about down here? If IGA chooses uniform, do we want 2 or 4? 4. Oh, I want that 4, right? So boom, we end up both price discriminating. We both end up with lower prices. Right? But if we can do a deal and figure out how to not price discriminate, right? Not send our circulars out farther than our own little territories, we can be in a better situation than here, right? Does that make sense? Y'all did the price discrimination thing, right? Last week? Yeah, okay. That's what I thought. Yeah, of course, it was on the quiz. Yeah, it makes sense. So what do you think we could do to change the payoffs to get here? Think if we changed it, it would still make sense and we could get a different situation? Well, let's think about it this way, right? We want IGA to choose uniform, whether G&W chooses price discrimination or uniform, right? So we want to be down here, and we want to make a payoff for IGA to do so, right? So in other words, we have to make these options look worse, right? And similarly, for G&W, right, we have to make these options look worse, right? So what do you think? Okay, step back a second. What kind of a situation would make it so that price discrimination wouldn't help you as a firm?
People just buy the cheap one.
Okay, so maybe when people just buy the cheap one, okay, so then there's no reason to give a discount, is that what you're saying? Like there's no reason to give them a discount on the higher end stuff?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Well, how about this? What if people are just really brand conscious and brand loyal? Right? So like, you know, right. The whole thing is about elasticity, right? And sensitivity to prices. So if you can make people less sensitive to the price discrimination, right? If you can make it so that they don't respond to it, then you can change the payoff so that you can get here, right? So specifically, if we want IGA to choose uniform no matter what D&W does, right? Then we have got to get this number down relative to this one, right? Or raise this one. But probably can't. Right? So if we make people more brand conscious, maybe this will come down. Right? Because then GW will see the logic of not doing price discrimination. That payoff just wouldn't be as high, right? Make it a 1. Same thing here. I'm going to solve it again. So, is IGA going to do price discrimination or uniform if GW picks price discrimination? Okay. Is IGA going to pick price discriminate or uniform if GW picks uniform? Okay. If IGA picks price discrimination, what's GW going to do? And if IGA picks uniform, what's GW going to do? So we really don't have much of a solution there, right? Haven't really solved the problem. Right? We've still got people picking this one. So to get a Nash equilibrium, the other thing we have to do is if G and W picks price discrimination, then we have to figure out how to get IGA to pick uniform, but probably not going. Right? You can at least get it to the point where there's some more uncertainty, and this isn't just a Nash equilibrium, right? By adding some more brand loyalty into it. Right, so maybe those ads aren't just, you know, deals, they're also like, hey, IGA is for winners, or something, right? Okay. Let's talk about chickens. Well, the game chickens. Come on. All right, let's play chicken. Anybody know what I mean by playing chicken? Anybody know?
The real game of chicken?
Yeah,
You're
like literally the game of chicken. So you find an alley, you find a crazy friend, well, find a very sane friend. And you get in your trucks. get on your bikes, and you ride at each other as fast as possible. How do we know who wins or loses?
Or chickens out first.
Whoever swerves, right? Whoever chickens out loses. Yeah, pretty simple, right? That's why boys live a lot shorter lives than girls.
Violence to a lot of girls.
Sounds like a great game. Anybody ever play chicken? Anybody?
Really.
You got to house. I've never played chicken. No. That's crazy.
Look for the thrill.
I suppose. So the idea is that obviously if nobody swerves, it's bad, right? But you don't want to be the one to swerve, right? So can we set up a set of payoffs that can make this make sense? So, is it too dark in here?
Get in there. Oh,
That's better. So, let's be boring this time. This is firm A. This is firm B. Firm? No, they're not. Well, sort of. So we've got these two companies, and both of them are thinking about entering one of two markets. And one market is very lucrative, and the other is not. A little Kansas town rivalry going here. So one of these markets has a large population of college students who love to blow money on stuff. And the other one has a small population of college students who love to blow money on stuff. Firm A and firm B, whoops, are both in the beverage industry. It's Red Bull stuff. It's like Monster or whatever. Okay, so we got Red Bull and Monster. I know what you're thinking. Red Bull and Monster, that's who we got here. Okay? And, oh, crap. I set my payoffs on. There we go. Audible Chinook. So Red Bull and Monster want to enter these respective towns, okay? But they both know that if they both enter the same town, then if they both enter the desirable one, then they're not going to do so hot, right? They both enter the town full of college kids who like to drink energy drinks. They're not going to enter, or they're not going to make as much money, right? But if they both swerve, right, and enter the optimal town, right, they'll both lose money. You know what I'm saying? Now, the idea is that you want the other one to swerve so that you get the higher payout, right? So let's go through this. Red Bull's choice between Ottawa and Chinook if Monster chooses Ottawa. Right? Bull's choice if Monster chooses Chanute. Right? So let's go the other way. If Red Bull chooses Ottawa, Monster wants Chanute, right? And if Red Bull chooses Chanute, Monster wants Ottawa. So we kind of got a similar problem than we had before, right? So it's like, it's good to be the sole entrant, right? In either one. Right? You kind of just want to be the only game in town in general, right? That's why you see when Monster chooses Ottawa, Red Bull picks Chanute, right? They want to go to the other market, right? Kind of like if Monster keeps going straight, right, on their bike, on their husky, then Red Bull wants to swerve, right? The swerving is still better than, well, I mean, head-on collision, right? Does that make sense? So this is in sort of the simultaneous framework, right? But do you think we might be able to get a little bit more information out of this if we set it up as a sequential game? What do you think? Remember what we talked about when we first introduced that stuff? We talked about commitment, right? You raise one leg. Let's talk through that. So this time I'm probably just going to use the black markers. So this time we've got Red Bull. Got two options. And that's going to be Chanute or Ottawa, right? And then Monster has two options. So we got to draw them twice, right? We've got to have Monster's two options in the case of Red Bull choosing Ottawa, and Monster's two options in the case of choosing Chanute, right? Make sense? Okay. I don't know why they did that. I'm just going to follow it. Getting myself in trouble here. So it's going to play out the same way, right? But it depends on who we let go first, right? If we let Monster go first, right? We go by sort of backward induction here, right? If Red Bull chooses Ottawa, Monster chooses which one? Chanute, right? If Red Bull chooses Chanute, Monster is going to choose Ottawa, right? But out of these two, Monster wants Ottawa, right? 100 or 50. Or you can see it, 50 or 100, right? Make sense? In other words, these are not options anymore. Right? So it's either this one or this one. Well, I want this one. So then Red Bull is stuck at 50 and Monster's going to get 100. Right? Because Red Bull since Monster goes to Ottawa, Red Bull's gonna have to go to Chanute. Right? If we let Monster choose first. Right? Make sense? But if we let Red Bull choose first, right, we already know ahead of time that Ottawa's better. Right? So Red Bull's gonna say, no matter what, I want Ottawa. Right? So then what's Monster gonna pick? 0 or 50. It's gonna pick Chanute and get 50, right? So it matters who picks first in this case, right? Playing chicken, right? If you're like, whoever flinches first, right, and spears off loses, right? In other words, they forecasted that the other person was going to stick with it, right? They were committed. They were going to go straight. So in the business side of things, this is what? You ever heard of first mover advantage? This is kind of a way to play that out, right? A way to analyze it with payoffs. Right? So you can just talk about first mover advantage. Well, you know, they establish their brand first. You know, they build a market, that kind of stuff, right? You can talk about all that stuff. But this is a way to kind of put dollars and cents to it, right? Put payoffs on it, see if it actually makes sense. Okay. So I think for the rest of the time, I want to talk about the bargaining stuff. And so I've got, let's see, it's what, almost 8 o'clock, so I've got an hour and 15, is that right? Okay, so this game theory stuff makes sense if we want to do a few different things, right? If we want to kind of figure out what the other party is going to do, right? Especially with these sequential move games, right? Or if we're in the position of getting to decide what the payoffs are, or allowing people to have, you know, multiple shots or coordinate with each other, right? Then we want to see how the game's going to play out, right? Like in the case of the prisoner's dilemma, right? If we're the DA, we want to see how to set up payoffs to get everybody to confess, right? Or if we're Federal Trade Commission, right? We might want to figure out how to set things up so that we don't get anybody coordinated, right? Or at least figure out when they might coordinate and who to look for, right? So that's all well and good, but this chapter 16 is kind of interesting because it talks about kind of like bargaining stuff in general, but it puts a lot of it kind of in the frame of sort of like human resource stuff, like unions and management and that sort of thing. And so just to kind of talk about the chapter a little bit before we get back into the decision tree stuff. The chapter kind of talks about 2 different types of bargaining, okay? And so there's strategic decision making, right? So where you might look at payoffs and stuff like this and try to maybe come up with like probabilities for what the other person is going to do, right? Figure out what they're going to do, or the likelihood of them making a choice, right? So that then you can make the optimal choice for you, right? And so, you know, just like in all the examples we've already shown, you know, you could make a decision if you're one of those grocery stores, whether to price discriminate or not, right? Based on if you think the other party is going to price discriminate, or you know, figure out your advertising strategy or something like that, right? So in this case, right, it's strategic decision making because the probability of the other party's decision matters for what you do. Okay. So, to give an example, I think I want to do this one as specific. So, everybody knows what I'm talking about when I say a union versus management, right? I'm talking about like labor union specifically. Right? So, in other words, an organization to which the workers at a company, right, the lower end people pay dues, right, and those people negotiate on behalf of the normal workers with the management for, you know, better working conditions, better pay, blah, 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 right? And the leverage they have is, right, is just the basic thing, right? You get everybody together, it's like, what are they gonna do, fire all of us, right? You gotta all act as a unit, maybe you can get a little bit better deal for yourself than if you didn't. So, in this case, we're going to look at a sequential move game between the union and the management. I always abbreviate this way. And in this case, what's really good about this, I think, about doing it this way is they have different decisions. And so it's kind of interesting to see maybe how this will play out differently based on you know, who goes first or who has who is sort of able to make credible threats or commitments and stuff like that. So, excuse me. So let's see. This is kind of weird and strange, but I'm just going to stick with it so that if you're, you know, studying through your book, you've at least seen this in real life. I will make this to arrow. There we go. That's okay. You read that, right? Someone else is laughing. You must not be able to read it. All right. So, what's the setup here? Well, remember, the way we solve this is backward induction, but the point is it's backwards. So when we actually do the setup, we do it in a different order, right? So this person is deciding first, right? The union. So the union has two options. They can either make a crappy offer, known in this book as a low offer, which seems weird. Like low, you mean like low pay? What? Like, I don't get it. Low as in low. They're not demanding a lot in terms of improvements, okay? So let's look at that, right? No, that's the other way around. That just doesn't make any sense. Because a generous offer means it's generous for the manager. Yeah, I'm going to completely change that because I think whoever wrote this book needs to be smacked upside the head. So let's say the union gives a generous offer, or they give a you know, worker-friendly offer. How's that sound? Does that help? Well, so worker-friendly offer means, you know,
Demanding a lot from
it's demanding a lot more from the management for the employees, right? Whereas a generous offer, they're being generous to the other person that they're negotiating, right? See what I'm saying? So these are the two options the union has, right? They can either, really stick it to them and say, no, we want air conditioning and offices for everyone, or something, right? Or they can say, you know what? 50 cents is good enough for us. We're happy with that, right? See what I'm saying? So then the management has two options. They can either reject the offer or they can accept it, right? And the point is that the union goes first, right? They're the one making the offer, right? So what do we all know about bargaining and negotiation when you're the one making the first call?
That's the door.
Say what? I heard like 5 things. So you said you set the terms for the discussion, is that what you said?
They had both have better answers.
What did you guys say?
I just said you shot high, you start up high.
You start high. Okay, right. So you have sort of an opening offer, right, that you both know is above what you would agree to.
You
We expect it to go.
You would accept less, right? It depends on which side you're on, right? Yeah. It's either going to be low if you're buying or high if you're selling, right? So, but if you're selling and you start high, well, the other person knows, okay, they're starting high, right? So most places when you buy something, right? I recently bought a vehicle. Buyer, if you're buying something, who's making the first offer? The seller, right? The dealership, or the person you're buying it from, or whatever, right? And so what is everyone's attitude when they go to a dealership? I am definitely not paying what they have on the sticker, right? That's what everybody says. Makes sense, right? And actually, something interesting about that, right? So from a salesperson's standpoint, have we ever sold stuff for a living? Okay, a few of you, right? From your perspective as the salesperson, you actually like it when, oh, you know what? I'm going to skip that. That's for non-strategic decision. Come on, sorry. I didn't give it away. Okay. Accept, reject, right? So let's do the backward induction on this thing. Given that the union makes a worker-friendly offer, management can either accept or reject. And remember, the management's payoffs are here on the right. So if they accept it, they get 25 for a payoff. And if they reject it, well, right, we're assuming it's a credible threat that the union's making, right? They're like, look, this is the deal. Boom, that's it. We're making you this worker-friendly offer, and if you don't like it, then we're all leaving. So the firm gets a big fat number, right? So what is the management going to pick if we know if the union says worker-friendly offer? Okay. And if the union says generous offer, the management is going to get 75 if they accept it, obviously, and nothing if they reject it, right? So they're going to do that. So we know the management's going to accept.
So really, when the union goes first, they will allow it.
If the payoffs are actually this way, right? So let me finish this one and then we'll see how we can monkey with it and see if it changes. Okay. So in this case, right, if the union now knows that no matter what the management does, they're going to accept the offer, well then, if I'm the union, I'm going to make a hard offer, right? I want to get what I can out of them. I don't want 70, I want 75, I don't want 25. Well, thank you, right? So the union goes this way. That makes a tougher offer, right? So where it gets interesting is if we can make credible threats of stuff, right? If we can commit to decisions, right? So if the union knows that this worker-friendly offer is ridiculous, right? And there's no way that the management would ever choose accept, right? This is one way to change the situation, right? So the management is going to commit to rejecting ridiculous offers, right? So then what's going to happen? Well, we already know what the management would do over here. What's the management going to do over here? Are they going to accept a low offer, or are they going to reject it? They're going to accept it, right? So that simplifies things for the union again, right? Now we know if we make a crappy offer, we're going to get 0. Now maybe 0 is better than negative, but in this case, our payoff if we make a generous offer is 25, right? This is the union payoff, right? So in that case, if the management can make a commitment to not accept a ridiculous offer or a worker-friendly offer or whatever, however you want to say it, right?
So really only in certain situations would it always be union, like coming out on top.
Well, so let's do this a different way. Instead of, okay, let's change things just a little bit. In the case of a worker-friendly offer and the management rejects it, right? Let's just assume that the management can just go find somebody else to do the job, but all of the workers have to go on unemployment or something, and their wage gets cut in half, right? Right? And same thing over here. We make a generous offer and they reject it, we've all got to leave, right? Or at least, I mean, this could be in a narrow time frame or something, right? We gotta take 2 weeks off of work and let the union bosses shine their shoes and go with a different offer, right? So let's go through it again. Union picks worker-friendly offer. Management says 75 or 0. They're going to still accept it, right? Union says generous offer for the management. Management says 20. Oh, I changed your own payout. I did. Change your own payout. Yeah, I did. I bet. Wait, no, I didn't. Yeah, this is the management payout right here. It's 0. So 0 or 25, we're still going to want the 25. Union generous offer. Management 75 to 0, they're going to pick this accept. Okay, so then if we cut this off and we say that they're not going to do this, then we're going to push the union basically into making a generous offer, right? Because now, if this is off the table again, right? We know the management's going to reject a bad offer. Then here, the management would accept, then the union has to make a generous offer, because if it makes the crappy offer, they're going to lose money, right? And they definitely don't want this one. It's a lot worse than this one, right? I guess they don't really change how much you make. The continue. That's okay. I'm just ad-libbing at this point. But the main thing here is that from the management's point of view, if they can guarantee that they're not going to accept this offer that doesn't benefit them, right? Remember, the payoff here was 75 for the union, 25 for the managers, right? If they can make a credible threat that they're not going to accept a crappy offer for them, right? Then they can avoid this low payoff and end up with the high payoff, right? Because the way this is set up is it's sort of like it's a zero-sum deal, right? Either you're going to get 75 or I'm going to get 75, right? And so if you can credibly threaten that you're not going to accept this bad offer, right, then you can make sure that you get here. Right? So the point of the whole thing is not much about the union, it's more about the manager, right? It's about making that credible threat, right? Because in the strategic side of things, everything you're doing is dependent on the payoffs for both of them, right? It's dependent on the probability, right? Reducing the probability that they're going to make you an offer in this case. If they're going to make you an offer that you don't like, right? So the strategy was make a credible threat, right? Does that make sense? But sort of risky, right? Because if they do go through with this, they don't believe that you're not going to accept, right? Then you might have to accept it. Because here, you certainly don't want 0. You're going to be forced into taking 25, right? So there's always a chance that it won't pan out the way that you were hoping. So let's talk about the non-strategic bargaining thing here for the last 45 minutes or so, and then 45 minutes to an hour, and then we'll maybe talk about a few other fun games and stuff like that. So, so this is all dealing with strategy, right? This is all kind of trying to break down decision making in ways that there's some kind of ability to change your behavior so that it affects the outcome for the other person. Now, the other way to think about this is to really think more about just opportunity costs in general. Okay? So, in the non-strategic view, there's sort of one phrase that you want to remember. Okay? And the phrase is, I don't have anything to lose. Right? So if we're bargaining over something, right, and I have less to lose from the deal than you do, am I in better shape than you are? What do you think? We'll put it this way. Let's say you have a store, right? And you've got people coming in all the time, right? And here I come and I really need the water bottle that you're selling, right? Can I just manufacture a water bottle of my own? Probably not. Right? I'm not a plastics engineer. And making one out of, I don't know, like a sheep stomach or something that is somewhere close. So if I'm coming into your store, and I need this, right? In other words, the opportunity cost of not walking out with a bottle is worse for me, right, than it is for you not selling it right there at that moment, right? So the reason why you as the store owner have more bargaining power than I do in this exchange is because I have more to lose than you do. Does that make sense? So it's more just kind of straightforward economic thinking about opportunity costs. Right? If my opportunity cost is really high at that activity, then if we're having, you know, a bargain over it, then you're in better shape. So have you ever done this in a bargaining situation? You ever try to convince them, the other person, that you don't have anything to lose? What do you think?
So instead of my offer, just not accepting it.
Yeah.
I would say it's like,
You hear it all the time, right? What do you hear about cars, right?
Just walk away.
Yeah, be willing to walk away, right? And what is that walking away? Well, it's a signal that you don't have much to lose, right? You have a low opportunity cost of that interaction, right? Just walk away. See you, buddy. Guess you don't get to feed your family now. Your car says, you know, I'm not buying a car. Doesn't matter to me, right? I'll just get a car tomorrow. I'll just drive to Lawrence. No. I'll just drive to Topeka or Kansas City. Well, I might. I'm sort of religiously committed when I go to Lawrence as a Kansas State Wildcat. So what are ways you think that you can use this kind of thing to your advantage? Well, I mean, lots of card examples, right? I'll just walk away. I'm in a better position. I have a lower opportunity cost for this transaction than you do. I'll just walk away. So how could you even that up if you're on the other side of that car sales transaction? How do you even that up? Possible?
I guess we lower the price.
or really trying to make them feel like they're missing out.
Okay. So in other words, raise the cost or lower the benefit, or excuse me, raise the benefit or lower the cost. Right? Okay. Well, that sounds like this is turning into a sales class. What did you say now?
So if you threaten that you have other offers, then definitely.
Right. In other words, yeah, because that lowers your opportunity cost of the specific interaction you're having now. Right? Good bit. Okay, so let's take the lower price one, because this one's kind of complicated, right? So you actually have three parties involved on this thing, right? You have the buyer, potential buyer of the car, you have the salesperson, and you have the sales manager. Anybody ever had a sales manager? Yeah. They're not very nice. Just kidding. They're okay. Make a lot of money being a sales manager. With like a high school education. Fascinated by the car business. I really am. Did I tell you about like the car thing a couple weeks ago? Take it for this another time. So I sold cars at one of 16 Toyota/Honda dealerships in the entire country. One of them's in Manhattan, Kansas. So I sold cars there for a summer. And it happened to be the summer where gas was like $5.50 a gallon in 2007. And all of you were in grade school. Pretty close. It was like 12 years ago. Oh my gosh, is that 12 years ago? So I was selling cars. I was in college selling cars for the summer. And, you know, sometimes it was a little tough, right? Because people just automatically hate you, right? There was one guy, I'm not kidding, this guy, he was the friendliest guy. I never saw him actually work at the dealership, like do anything. He just sort of joked around a lot. And then I guess at some point in the day, he would sit down and make phone calls. I think he probably did it in the evening from home. But he had been there so long, he had a Rolodex thing, right? You know what a Rolodex is? It's just like a thing with people's numbers in it. It's And this guy was really old school. This guy had a high school education, and at the time, 12 years ago, he probably made $115,000 a year selling cars in a relatively small town. You know, I mean, Manhattan's not a giant city. So he had a high school education, barely did anything during the day, sort of walk around the dealership. In fact, he sold so many cars, they didn't even really care if he showed up. Like, and he got a company car. He was the only salesman of a company car. It was insane. And that's a lot of money. Like today, that's like, I don't know, 150, 160,000 probably. No. Maybe 125, which is still, it's a lot of money, right? I mean, that's a good money for, what do you do, right? You call people up. Hey, I sold you that car 2 years ago. You want a new one? That's how I made money. Unreal. But, so the sales manager, you think the sales manager probably likes him. Hey, right? Is there a scenario in which the sales manager wouldn't like him? What do you think?
Compensation was tied into how many he sells.
Well, his compensation certainly is because he's a car salesman, and that means he works on commission 100%.
But I mean, if the sales manager was tied, like if part of his
Oh,
salary
okay.
is tied.
Well, okay, right. So yeah, so it's even a little more complicated, right? But the thing is, the sales manager, just purely from the, let's say the sales manager is a perfect representative of the owner of the business. Right? All he cares about is profit loss, let's say, right?
I mean, there's a little bit of principal agent problem there, right? Because you
Well, there is.
wouldn't want him to.
There is, but I'm assuming there isn't for right now.
I mean, he's not being very efficient with his time.
Well, so here's the thing. If you're, and this guy's name is Dale, I don't know if he's still around, but Dale, right, salesman, he wants the prices to do this, right? And in fact, in sales meetings in the morning, all of the experienced sales guys would be angry. If a car came in, like a used car, something like that, came in, and they priced it too high. They would be frustrated because they knew that automatically, right, it was going to be harder to sell that vehicle, right? I didn't want to price too low either, right? But that was kind of.
In terms of the pricing, does someone just Kelly Blue look into the back and it's not on there?
Man, it's so not that official. It's not even funny. Like
It's
you
less
would not
official
even
than that.
believe. You would not even believe how little time and effort goes into like turning over a used car.
I've never actually thought about it.
It is unreal. Like no, I mean like. Okay, so I remember there was this guy and his daughter had been in a car accident and she was in a wheelchair. This is hard. So he has this cool Jeep. It's like decked out. He's a military guy, right? He lives in Fort Riley or something. That was really. And he's got this decked out Jeep. I mean, it was probably like, you know, a $30,000 Jeep plus another $10,000 worth of stuff or something, right? When it was new. So his daughter's in a car accident. She's in a wheelchair. So he can't have the Jeep anymore because he can't fit a wheelchair in the back of the Jeep. It's too small, right? It was like one of the really small. This is before they had the full wheel.
Yeah.
They had those. So he comes in and he trades in his Jeep with me for a used Honda Civic that was on the lot. So remember, it's 2007, and he needed.
Oh man, he wanted a little four-door
No.
Civic?
I don't know why the reason he didn't want a bigger car is because the gas was so expensive. He didn't want another vehicle that had really bad gas mileage, like his Jeep would get awful mileage. Terrible. So he traded straight across with his used Civic. And so I think, so the way we did the deal, they basically traded him that the Jeep was worth enough that the sale for the sale of the Civic got recorded at full price. And so I think the Civic was like $9,000, and they had bought it for $6,000. And so I made like 18% of the $3,000 difference. And you know, it took me 3 hours at the most. And so that was like a really, really good deal for me. So, you know, and the more cars I sold, the bigger percentage I
Oh, they upped your percentage?
Yes. And at that dealership, we capped out at 22%.
Were you capped out at a dollar amount or just capped out on the percentage? that you-
Percentage.
So you
But
can-
new cars are totally different. New cars, you just
Uh,
make $200 every time you sell a new car. That's it. So you don't get much. This dealership doesn't get much. Oh, yeah. So you as the salesman, right, you want to lower your opportunity cost of doing the deal, right? Oh, the price is low. I can sell it to anybody. No, it doesn't matter if you don't want it, right? No big deal. Oh, you don't want it? That's okay. We'll sell it to somebody else. No problem. Right? So as a salesperson, that's kind of what you want to happen, right? You want to lower the prices. Like, holding margin constant, right? Because of course you're going to get a piece of the margin. Everything else equal, you want the price lower. But if you're in charge of the, the decision of the pricing, right? If you're the owner, or you're the sales manager or whatever, you may not want that, right? So then you price the car too low and you lose money. So, like one of the other ways to do this would be to give salespeople bonuses, right? Whenever they make a sale, you give them a bonus, right? So the bonus could offset some of the reduction in their compensation they would get from accepting a lower price, right? So if I knock another $1,000 off of this car, that's going to lower the money that I get. But if I get a bonus for selling it, that just washes out, right? So, this is a fun one. So the idea behind this is that any reasonable offer, right? Any reasonable conclusion to a bargain, right, between two people is going to basically split the benefits, right? I don't know how much Philip gets into the math. I don't really see much here, so I'm going to stay away from it. But, so let's talk about this. Let's talk about when is the best time to ask for a raise. What do you think? Like, under what circumstances would you ask for a raise?
I've done something really good, very good performance review, and I think that I deserve it.
Okay, so if we're talking about two things in economics, right? Benefits and costs, right? So from the employer standpoint, you're trying to raise the benefit that they get, right?
Yeah.
From buying your labor, right? So you're trying to convince them that they get more consumer surplus from employing you at a certain wage rate, right? And so now that they've got more consumer surplus, because you're a great employee, right? Why don't you push up the price you're willing to pay, right? And reallocate some of that consumer surplus, right? Remember, because your employer's the consumer, right? They're the demand side,
Oh, yeah.
right? You just say, look at how much consumer surplus I'm giving you, right? Buyer surplus, right? They're buying your labor, right? Look how much buyer surplus you're getting. Why don't you give some of that back to me?
I'm sure my boss would love if I showed that with the chart.
Yeah. I might.
No direct cost here.
Right. Okay, so fair enough, right? I'm a better benefit to you. Okay? So what's one way to signal that besides cringily drawing it on a chart? Like you were starting.
Productivity and Like you relative to the.
Most jobs aren't productivity based. Most jobs are overhead these days. Unless you're, unless you're like literally making furniture or something. You're overhead. Like your current job in Topeka is overhead.
Yeah.
You are Mr. Overhead. No one can figure out what your productivity is.
At the bar?
Yeah. How?
Kinda, you can probably use like a proxy like sales.
Okay, what's the first word you just said? You could use a proxy.
Yeah, I don't know.
Oh, when Jacob's here, everybody buys more stuff.
Yeah,
Is that because he's ugly and they're trying to like get the look of him out of their head, or what?
I'm trying to think of something else, but yeah, I guess.
Well, what about another employer?
Like if I went somewhere else.
Not you, man.
All over right there.
What if you had an offer from somewhere else? And I know you never thought about that because you work for your mom's bar, and you're not going to be like, hey, mom, I got a better offer.
I had that situation a couple summers ago. I was working at this landscape construction company, and I was making no money for the work that I was doing. I got a job offer. I was making 11, got a job offer for 14. So I went to my boss, who was very good to me for a number of years. I was just like, hey, man, like, this is what I got. What can you do? And he was like, nothing. I was like, I left.
A lot to unpack there.
What's that?
Well, I mean, you obviously liked your current boss that was paying you less money. But for $3 an hour, in other words, you didn't like him $3 an hour more. Right? Okay. So the point is, you were able to get this offer somewhere else, right? In other words, like Jacob was saying, look at how wonderful I am as an employee, right? Well, you were able to convince someone else who hadn't even seen you work, right? Apparently for some reason made the same appraisal that you did, right? And said, okay, well, you have more experience, I'll pay you more, or whatever.
My first boss, his brother actually was one of my.
Oh, it's like a family
Oh,
feud.
man.
Dang, no, that's dangerous, man. That's Hatfield and McCoy.
I haven't talked to their first guy since about 4 or 5 years. I saw him hospital.
Man, that's terrible. He gave you your start and everything.
Oh, yeah.
What a
He was really good to me, and I was really good to him, and then there's,
Yeah, until somebody came around with $3 an hour and then you left.
Gotta pay for school somehow.
I'm just.
But no, yeah, he was.
So like same industry, similar job and all that.
The first one was landscaping and construction, the other one was a steel machine factory.
Skill, you said?
It's like just steel machines, so like
Steel.
CNC machines.
Okay. Well, yeah. So I mean, like that was obviously a little more skill than it was actually. And you assume that your IQ was higher. Well, okay, that's fair. So, but that's the point, right? So the best time to ask for a raise from your current employer is when the opportunity cost of leaving is very low, right? That makes sense? So if you already have another offer in hand, and you said, hey, what can you do? Got nothing to lose, right? Just like I said before, got nothing to lose. Take another job. I tried to do this when I was at University of Georgia. I tried to get a job offer at Oklahoma State, and I didn't get the job offer. But I tried.
It's probably a dangerous game, and I can need you to have a job and flirt with them. No.
Even if you can even make, sometimes if you can make a credible threat, you can even get a raise without even applying somewhere else. Just by threatening to apply.
Are you allowed to apply to other places while you're?
What? How do they stop you?
I mean, I'm just.
It's not a concentration camp. Yeah, you can apply other places.
I guess yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, in fact, there's probably employment. There's probably
I think about it.
There's probably employment law that says that they can't fire you just for applying for jobs. But in this case, like I didn't get the offer, but I still tried. Before the offer was made, I still tried to get perks out of my old job. They did a little, but and then when I got the offer to come here, I basically told him there was nothing he could do to keep me. Sayonara. So that was fun. But the whole point was, it had nothing to do with me really being strategic, right? With my former boss. It wasn't about strategy. It was just about the fact that I needed to lower my opportunity cost to make the deal go through, right? I needed to have nothing to lose, right? So then all of a sudden, on a comparative basis, he had a lot to lose, right? Now he's going to lose another employee. Still haven't replaced me, by the way. Bam! You're paying me more, jerk. Say what?
Somebody leaves and their job's well,
It's just academia in general, man. So which one of these views do you think is more realistic and explains the real world better? Well, so let's go back to the game theory stuff. I'm probably getting marks on my shirt. If we think about the bargaining as a sequential move game, right? Where one person makes a call and then the other person makes a decision based on the first, right? So that's where we can talk about potentially having first mover advantage, right? Like in the case of the union, right? If they knew that the management couldn't really make any kind of credible commitment, right, credible threat to reject their offer, then the fact that they were the first ones putting the offer on the table, gave them a first mover advantage in the bargain, right? They get to kind of set things up. And the nice thing about this is you can try to get information about the other person, right? That's more for the non-strategic stuff. It's getting information about the other person's opportunity cost. But in the strategic side of things, this is kind of where we get our first mover advantage perspective, right? At least from a bargaining standpoint. First mover advantage in terms of, being the first one to create a product or make a market or something like that is a different story. But the fact that you get to kind of set the terms of the deal is an interesting component of understanding things as this sort of sequential move game, right? So if you've got sequential move game over here and non-strategic sort of opportunity cost-based bargaining over here, which one of those do you think is more realistic in terms of explaining how things actually work for people? The opportunity, so the second one, the non-strategic one,
Oh, never mind.
the one that basically says,
Can you explain it again? Maybe I missed
yeah, sure, okay. So the first one is strategic bargaining, right? So the idea there is it's sort of a game theory thing where where the outcome is based on someone's ability to make a commitment, right? Like we showed in the game, right? Management can commit to not accepting a crappy offer, right? So with strategic, the idea from the union's perspective was, now I know which offer I need to start with because I know how well the management is positioned to actually make a commitment to reject my offer, right? So it's more about benefits, right, and probabilities. Now, on the other hand, the second one was non-strategic bargaining, and the focus was more on opportunity cost, right? So the benefit that any two people will get out of making a bargain is going to be split based on their opportunity cost, right? So any reasonable agreement is going to basically mean you started here was the seller's offer up here, and here was the buyer's initial offer, right? And you split it in the middle based on opportunity cost of the relative parties, right? Let me draw that up. So here's the seller's offer. Here's the buyer's offer. And the deal you strike is going to be dependent on their opportunity costs. Okay? It has nothing to do with what the seller thinks the buyer might do if the seller made this and such an offer and blah, 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 right? It's all about reducing their opportunity costs, right? Because if you're the seller and you can reduce your opportunity cost, the price will end up closer in your favor, right? If I'm a car sales guy and I got to sell a car today, right? Price is going to end up down here, right? Because you're just going to walk away if I don't lower the price. See what I'm saying? And this has nothing to do with strategy, right? It's purely based on my opportunity cost, right? There's nothing in here about the seller trying to figure out what the buyer is going to do, right? In this view, none of that matters. If we both have the same opportunity cost, the price is going to end up right in the middle, right? We're going to split the gains. If the seller has lower opportunity costs, they're going to get more of the gains, right? The price is going to end up higher, closer to where they want to sell. Does that make sense? And vice versa. Right? If the buyer has lower opportunity costs, the price will falls down. So which one of those do you think is better descriptive of kind of the way things really work?
That's probably the first one. But I think like on the individual level, like the second one, modest situation sounds more, I guess, I don't know. Like I said, the second one in the way, like, especially the situation you described, like car sales, because that's almost realistic, like you kind of think of it, like, you know, self-reflective in terms of your opportunity cost. Like it's harder to know about outside influences. So like, even though you might think about other people's moves, like it's still justified in their view, you know what I mean?
So what you're saying is that because it's like a one-on-one interaction, the only thing that you really have is your opportunity cost. Like
The first situation just sounds more of like a firm. You know what I mean?
Like, the first situation, I think you need more information about the other person.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Or the other firm.
Okay. Yeah.
Right? Because the union, remember, they needed to know if the management was going to be able to credibly say that they were not going to accept a crappy offer. Right? So they had to know something about the management. Right? Whereas here, it's pretty simple, right? You just have to know who has lower opportunity costs.
But I mean, so if you're, how would you really know that though? I mean, if you're the seller, how would you actually know someone's opportunity costs until they're gone?
How do you know someone's going to buy another round of the bar?
Say it, do it.
You obviously don't have a very high opportunity cost of them buying another round, do you?
That's not what I mean.
Well, my point is, if you are in the position of selling something or buying something with really high stakes, you're probably going to figure out how to gauge the other person's opportunity cost, right? In that frame, or in the other frame, you're going to try to figure out how to gauge their commitment to strategies that don't benefit you.
Okay.
Right? Those are the two different ways of looking at it, right? So how do you figure out if somebody has higher opportunity cost than you do? Well, when I was selling cars, you look for one of these, this thing. Because if there's one person there and they have one of these on their finger, very likely they have a very, very, very high opportunity cost of buying a car at that point. Right? And the line was Is there anyone else involved in this decision that we need to talk to? Very diplomatic, right? Still getting in trouble sometimes. Say the wrong person. Really sensitive about it. I won't use this. But you see what I'm saying? I'm trying to gauge their opportunity costs, right? Now, when I'm on the other side of the transaction, I'd love to do a sales transaction. I'm hoping they're going to do it. The other side of the transaction, look, man, like a guy who was a state representative. So he was a representative, like in our little district or county or whatever, to the state. And he was a surgeon. Okay, he's like very wealthy. And he's like old. And he comes up to me wearing like cotton shorts that were like way too short, you know what I mean? Like too short. And you know, he's like, I don't know, 75, wearing a ratty old t-shirt with like paint splatter all over it. And he's like, oh yeah, I'm looking for our car. He parks his car like off, like in the service area, and then walks up to the car sales floor. So then like 2 weeks later, I sell him a like, you know, top of the line Honda Accord with like leather and blah blah blah. He was okay, but his wife was super nice. She brought me cookies in her purse when we did the deal. So I got chocolate chip cookies for selling the car, and $200 for 2 weeks of work. And another guy, he's like, oh yeah, I'm just coming through, just coming through Manhattan with my wife. So that guy, Toyota Tacoma, a used Toyota Tacoma. And it was a ton of money. And his wife gave me a tip. And I was like, I can't accept this. And she's like, do it anyway. It was like $20. It was a big deal at the time. But what were they trying to do, right? Why was the guy showing up in super short cotton shorts? Why was the other guy telling me he was just driving through? Why were they telling me that? To lower my perception of their opportunity cost, right? To convince me that if I try to get a deal with them, I'm gonna be down here, buddy, right? So how do you tell? Well, you get burned a couple deals and your sales manager yells at you and then that's how, right? Do you think that guy who made $115,000 a year on a high school education, do you think he was very good at convincing people that he had a very low opportunity cost? Getting that price up here? I bet he was. He was good. And it's not necessarily about price always, right? It's also about the fact that you can buy a Honda at like 15 dealerships within 100 miles there, right? So why buy 10? When I first got there, he sold this old couple an S2000. It's like empty nesters, these little sports car, like a two-seater. But man, he was like, oh, jolly, and oh, yeah, you know, just, oh, I'm your buddy, right? I don't need to sell the car. I'm just your buddy. I'm just here hanging out, man. I'm just relaxed. I don't need anything. We're good. Low opportunity cost, right? Wearing all this gold all over him. Right? Like, I've already got tons of money. He loved all the gold, man. He had like gold bracelets, gold necklace, and all this stuff. I've already got tons of money. I don't need your money. Right? That could backfire, obviously, but you know. What do you think? Think this one's more realistic? Or do you think the strategic one's more realistic? Or what situations do you think one's more realistic than the other?
I think both. I still think it depends on the situation.
Yeah, so I mean, it could depend on the situation, but what situations do you think it depends on?
Getting down to people involved.
So if there are fewer people involved, it goes to more of this opportunity cost. Okay, and then the strategic one gets more involved when you have an organization or a group of people or something like that. Okay. What do you think though about, like, how many of you have siblings? You do? Okay. Lots of them. All of them. Good. Okay. How many of you used the strategic method when you were bargaining with your siblings about something? In other words, the strategic one, right? Trying to figure out if they can make a credible threat on their decision, so helps you make a decision. Think so? I bet you did. I did. I had a little brother. And now I have 3 children. Boy, girl, boy. Very interesting. My littlest is 10 months old, and he just started doing this. And it's the most hilarious thing in the whole world. But you can tell him, you can be like, say no, 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 and he'll do it. And then laugh. It's hilarious. He rides on his mom's back. My wife has this like baby carry thing. He's big enough to ride on her back now. He's like a little monkey. Hanging out on my back. It's hilarious. So you think you use the strategic one with your siblings? What about your parents? Is mom going to say no to this? Well, there's a meme for this, right? There's the whole like go ask grandma thing, right? When you're a little kid, you go ask your grandma. Your grandma's not going to say no, right? Your mom might say no, but your grandma's not going to say no, right? So of course, that's strategic, right? Don't ask your mom. Find your grandma and ask her. Grandma, can I have a cookie? Yes. Of course you can have a cookie. Right? It wasn't about opportunity cost, right? Grandma doesn't have opportunity cost. Grandma was just found the cookies. And love. You think you use this one with your siblings? Trying to figure out who had more to lose? Can you give me an example of one? You want to give me an example?
Computer time.
Say what? Arguing over computer time. Okay, so like you had one computer in the house.
How to justify who got the computer.
Ah, okay. So how to justify? So that sounds like you were using this one.
That's not what you asked.
Yeah, no, I'm asking for either one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
but yeah, no, that's fine.
Yeah.
So you were justifying it, so you were trying to say, well, wait a minute, justifying it. How does that play into your opportunity cost?
Because, okay, so the person that wouldn't get it would have the higher opportunity cost, right? Because they would find value in something else, right? So if I need the computer for my homework, I had a lower opportunity cost, because the next thing I would have done would have been productive for me.
Well, I think you were more arguing benefit, right? That's not really cost. You're saying the homework is more important than your sibling wanting to like play Minecraft or whatever, right?
I guess, yeah, but then I'm looking at like my personal opportunity cost.
Oh.
Isn't that, I mean, that's the only.
Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah. Yeah, I think the thing there though is your sibling in that situation, it would be more about the fact that you actually had a really high opportunity cost, right? If you didn't do your homework, it was going to be really bad for you, right?
Right.
And so the point was you had a lot more, you had to give up a lot more to get the computer time if you were going to justify it on that, right? In other words, if you're the seller, the price is going to come down, right? Because now your sibling's like, okay, yeah, you want to do your homework? What do you want to give me? Right?
Right.
That's like paying a high price, right? For the computer time. Your price is way up here. You're buying. You're buying computer time. Your opportunity cost is really high, but you have your homework. Don't tell me you did your homework all the time.
Little on real estate.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I'm doing my homework, playing RuneScape. Yeah. How about anybody else?
My brother and I, we collected baseball cards growing up, so we opened a new pack and they had some cards that I wanted. That's what we were playing.
Ah, okay.
I was more familiar with like old players and like the value of the cards, so I often rip them off, but that's just part of being the oldest sibling.
Yeah, that's part of the advantage. Yeah. All right. That makes sense. So how do you think this one informs our discussion, well, your discussion, over the last few weeks about like market power and monopoly and stuff like that? Can you put like the firm's decisions into context in these two? So I mean, we already did it with the first one, right? We talked about like the entrance, right? So remember, we did a sequential game at the beginning of the class tonight. And we had the entrant up here deciding to try to enter or stay out, right? And then we had the other firm over here. If the entrant tried to come in, they could either allow them in, you know, just let them be, right? Or they could try to fight them, right? When we talked about ways they would try to fight them, is, you know, just crash their prices really low, or, you know, hire a lawyer, right? So we talked about the strategic view for this, right? Where it's kind of like it was sort of up to the entrant whether the second person there, the incumbent, was going to, you know, be accommodative or fight, right? Let me show you that one again. You have it in the notes. I'm gonna go back. What did we say about credible threats on that one? Remember?
What was the question on?
So,
Well, I got rid of stuff, didn't it? The credible threats, you can back it up, you can get rid of the branch or.
yeah, so if the incumbent said that they're not going to accommodate that new entrant, right? Then the payoff for the new entrant was -5 to fight the incumbent, or -5 or 0 to stay out. Right? So if the incumbent can make a credible threat that they're not going to accommodate them, right, that they're going to fight them, then the entrant's decision is simple: stay out. But if the incumbent can't make that credible threat, right, and the entrant knows that they try to come in, then the incumbent won't fight them, right? Because remember, the payoffs were -5 for fighting and 5 for accommodating, right? So strategically, right, this incumbent needs to think about its ability to make a credible threat that they're going to fight, right? So what kinds of things would go into their ability to make a credible threat?
They have resources to lobby.
Okay, if they have, maybe if they just have a lot of cash, or if they're very profitable, right? Either of those two things, or both, probably, right? They got a lot of loose cash sitting around. They could go, you know, buy a bunch of lawyers for the next 6 months, right? They're very profitable, right? Then they're going to be tough to fight, right? Because it's going to be hard to get investors to sell their stock in that company and buy yours, right? Invest in your company instead of theirs, right? Okay. So one way to be able to make credible threats to not be accommodative is just to have more resources, right? Have better cash flow or that kind of thing, right? Okay. What else? There are other ways you can make a credible threat to not accommodate.
Use like other companies that are already in the market, like kind of show a track record almost, like that we already kind of.
That you've already pushed people out before.
Yeah,
You've already fought them before.
Mm-hmm.
Make sense? So establishing really big market share of the industry, right? Just sort of asserting your dominance or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
T-posing on the enemy, right? What else?
They try to protect part of the production process by patenting it.
Okay. Then you need to go into law. You keep talking about like You keep talking about legal remedies.
Yeah.
I love it. Okay, so patents and stuff like that. So just generally raising barriers to entry, spending money, raising the barriers to entry, sort of telling them that, okay, well, we're just going to keep doing this, right? Don't even try, because we're just going to, get another utility patent, so you can't put a copper pipe on a brass fitting or something. Utility patents are crazy.
So intellectual property patents. That's jokes.
Oh, okay. You mean like? So is that a patent? Is that a patent or a copyright?
Oh, I think it's a copyright. You're
Yeah,
right.
copyright. Yeah. A patent implies some kind of like engineering or something.
There it is.
You can patent sugar.
See, yeah.
There it goes. Yeah. What you cannot is you can't do a copyright on like .doc or .xls, right? At the end of your filings. You can't patent those. So
Oh, so you just.
So instead of buying Word, you can use like OpenOffice or LibreOffice or some other program, and you can save files in those formats. Pretty cool. But you don't have to buy Word because you pay tuition here. So you can just download Word here. Yeah. Told you something you didn't know, didn't I? So that's sort of the strategic view of this whole monopolist or, large firm, kind of incumbent firm kind of thing, right? What about the non-strategic view? Can we understand their behavior in markets through this non-strategic view? Think about opportunity costs. Monopolist versus a new entrant. Yeah. Incumbent versus entrant. How?
Monopolists don't really have much to lose. Like, so
They got everything.
well, yeah. Well,
The question is, it's relative, right? Do they have as much to lose as the other partner, right? So this is price, but. So you're saying they have a lower opportunity cost of market share than the entrant does, okay? So what do you mean? Like, it's no big deal to them if it's just one, well,
like if it's just one firm that enters, like it's like depending on their impact,
sure.
like it varies. Like
Yeah, it depends on if,
like there's like Apple or like Apple and Android or whatever.
Sure.
Like that's a pretty big competitor. When that started going back around in the 90s or early 2000s.
So it could be dependent on things like this, right? So when, Red Bull kind of created the energy drink market back in the 90s. But then when like Coca-Cola and some of these other companies started their brands, maybe at first, they didn't do much, but then because Coca-Cola is such a huge company, they're like a bull in a china shop, right? So in that case, right, a new entrant, at least on the front end, seems really dangerous, right? Because now they can screw it up, right? I mean, just look up new Coke if you don't think Coke can screw something up. I don't know if you've ever heard of Coke, but no, it's not. But so they can screw it up. But the thing is, Coke has so much money. They're like a giant bank. Like they want to enter that market, they're just going to do it, right? And so in that case, right, Coca-Cola's opportunity cost versus Red Bull might have had really high opportunity cost to that one, right? But there's not much they could have done. On the other hand, so who's ever watched Shark Tank? You watch that show? You ever pay attention to the guy in the middle? Kevin, the bald guy, his hair like me.
Mr. Warner.
Yeah. You ever pay attention to him? I think I have like 10 of his phrases memorized. One of them is when like I don't know, a married couple, comes to create some new mousetrap out of the garage or whatever, right? He's like, why isn't the biggest company in the industry going to squash you like a bug? He said all the time, right? So there, the threat of a new entrant that's just somebody with a product idea, I mean, who cares, right? Yeah, okay, enter all you want and then completely lose everything, right, and go bankrupt. right? Because the mousetrap isn't going to tolerate any kind of new entrance. But there's no way for you to get any kind of market share away from them anyway, for just some guy working out of the garage, right? Unless you create it. But even then, I mean, come on. That story's over. I mean, it's not like you paid for the garage, right?
The one that Kevin did, the one that always says stuff about money has been sold.
Yeah.
See that one?
Yeah, that's why they call him, ironically call him Mr. Wonderful. Yeah, like Mark Cuban has more money than everyone else on the panel, like times 10. So, like, he's the one that's really wealthy. But that makes sense, right? That you could frame the monopolist's decision to fight an entrant in the same opportunity cost framework, right?
Right.
That's a good idea. I like that. Okay, so with that, let me know if you have any questions, and if not, I probably will see you in fall, right before Christmas.